Members, good morning. This is the appointed time. We have a quorum. So I call this meeting to order. Welcome to this morning meeting. As of the last meeting in the 2023 Legislative Council session, we've approved 12 items with a total commitment standing at $50.031 billion. We have 2 items for discussion today. Both are new funding proposals submitted by the government. The 2 proposals entailed a commitment of $1.9141 billion. Should all funding proposals be endorsed by members, altogether 14 projects will have been approved with a total commitment of $51.9452 billion. Deducting the $11.86 billion for land acquisition and computerization projects. For public works, the total commitment will stand at $41.446 billion. Members, if you have direct or indirect pecuniary interest in relation to items discussed today, please disclose the nature of interest before you speak according to Rule 83A of the ROP. Would members also please note the voting requirement under ROP 84 in relation to direct pecuniary interests. Item 1. 849 CL site formation and infrastructure works for public housing development in Cha Kwo Ling Village, Kowloon East. 771 CL site formation and infrastructure works for the development of Cha Kwo Ling Kaolin mine site phase 2. Item number PWSC 2023-24 number 6. Members are invited to recommend to the FC the upgrading of the 849 CL to Category A at an estimated cost of $1.046 billion in MOD prices. The government consulted the panel on development in relation to the 2 proposed projects at the meeting of the 28th of March 2023. Members in general support the submission of this item to the PWSC for consideration. The deliberation report has been sent to members via email dated the 8th of May this year for members' reference. We have with us today Ms. Doris Ho, Permanent Secretary for Development, Ms. Louisa Yan, Deputy Secretary for Development, Mr. Victor Chan, Project Manager CDD, and Mr. Clarence Young, Chief Manager CDD, and Ms. Karen Leung from the Lands Department, and Ms. Vivian Lai from Planning Department. We have members lining up to ask questions. Each member will be given 4 minutes, questions and answers included. Mr. Bill Tang will kick off the discussion. For Cha Kwo Ling Village, this is a village of squatter structures. We support this development project for public housing development for the purpose of optimizing land use. In relation to land resumption and the number of residents to be rehoused vis-a-vis the number of public housing units to be made available, we're talking about an increase by 6 to 7 times. This project is hard to come by, not to mention the premium location. It is conveniently situated near an MTR station. But I'd like to bring to your attention the view of the Association of Cha Kwo Ling residents. This is a really representative group. We are all aware of the geographical location of Cha Kwo Ling. Basically, in the 1960s and 70s, the only access to the village was via the sea. I understand you have a heritage conservation proposal, but it's not just about heritage monuments. It's also about conservation of culture. We have the Bun Festival Parade, Dragon Boat races. So there are major views from residents. In relation to land to be reserved for the purpose of holding these activities of cultural value, how are you going to deal with this matter? Because two parties at least are involved, the Housing Society and the Housing Authority. Through this meeting, I'd like you to explain how you preserve the village culture, especially as this village is situated in an urban area. You've come up with a figure in relation to your pre-clearance survey. That's some 1,000 residents affected. Depending on the years of residency, you have a two-tier system for compensation and rehousing arrangements. Can you tell us how many residents have lived there for less than 2 years? So we'll take the question, please. Ms. Doris Ho. Thank you, Mr. Tang, for your comment. After we've submitted this item to the Legislative Council, we have continued to meet with residents, and Dr. Gan Men Yu helped us arrange another meeting with residents. In relation to heritage impact assessment, no, not heritage, specifically the cultural aspect. Please let the PS finish. We have the Law Mansion, which has been classified as a Grade 3 historic building. The Housing Society will preserve the structure, will also consider how we can put it to good use. For example, we can rent it to NGOs in the future for other activities. Preserving Law Mansion can help us preserve culture of the place. There are rich cultural elements, and there are different ways to preserve culture and promote the historical development of the place. So we will be considering putting Law Mansion to good use after conservation. And there are also other ideas, for example, the dragon boats. I understand Cha Kwo Ling Village runs a dragon boat team as well. These are cultural heritage facilities. We will consider preserving them as well. Tin Hau Temple, Cha Kwo Ling, is not within the scope of this project, but a public open space will be set aside since it is next to the project scope for the purpose of displaying cultural and heritage-related items such as the dragon boat. Be succinct, please. Chairman, yes. If I may, I'd like to explain the impact on residents brought about by the site clearance exercise. According to information we have about 860 affected households and sub-households. We believe for the 860 households, they will have to be rehoused in 2 phases. In phase 1, 155 households will be moving out in the first half of 2024. For the remaining 610 households, they will move out in the first half of 2025. The affected households have been informed of the arrangements in writing by the Lands Department. Now, what we are doing is that the Lands Department is asking for further information from the affected households. We already obtained information including the particulars and the number of household members in the pre-clearance survey. But in order to consider the eligibility for public housing, we need further information. The Lands Department has so far contacted half of all the affected households. They are willing to go through the vetting procedures. So the Lands Department will ask for further information from the remaining half of the affected households. Once the information is ready, a preliminary vetting procedure will be carried out, and then the relevant cases will be referred to the Housing Society and the Housing Authority for further vetting. Now, about the question on the years of residency, such as 2 years or 7 years, and the eligibility, we do need time for further information. Our goal is that in the third quarter of this year, for the 155 households in the first phase, if they are eligible for public housing, our goal is for them to be allocated with public housing. Mr. Tony Chair. Well, I think members in general support development projects at the 3 urban squatter areas, including Cha Kwo Ling, in order to increase land supply and housing supply in urban districts. We received petition letters and views have been expressed at the earlier panel meeting. Proper rehousing and compensation arrangements should be put in place, and the administration has been proactive in reaching out to them to get an understanding of their predicament. I have a question on Phase 2, Cha Kwo Ling Kaolin mine site. I understand 3 public housing blocks will be built. There is, in fact, another piece of land. I understand a school will be built there. And there have been questions on the need for the school at that location. I believe when you take forward this project, you will conduct a study to gauge the demand for the purpose of optimizing land use. I hope that this will not cause the slowing down of development of the site. There is also another site reserved for a joint or government joint user complex at the Cha Kwo Ling Village site. For infrastructure, apart from roads, public transport facilities, it is equally important to provide community facilities. Can you tell us more about the government joint user complex? Ms. Doris Ho. I thank member for the comments. For the Kaolin mine site, on which a primary school is to be built, we have talked to the Education Bureau and confirmed that there is a need to build a school there. Now, there is a site for the school in Kaolin mine site, whereas in Cha Kwo Ling Village, there is no need to set aside another piece of land for a school because of this primary school to be built at the Kaolin mine site, so that we can maximize the space for housing development in Cha Kwo Ling Village. So that's about the merit of this proposed layout. We will continue to liaise closely with the Education Bureau as we proceed to the construction stage. The next question from the member is on the proposed government joint user complex on Cha Kwo Ling Village site. As per the current timetable, site formation should be completed by 2028. We estimate that about 4 years will be required for the government joint user complex to be completed. So we're talking about 2033-34. Major population intake for Cha Kwo Ling Village development will take place roughly around 2033. So we should be able to dovetail the two. As for the facilities to be provided in the government joint user complex on the ground floor, you will find a public transport interchange. That means bus routes, minibus routes serving residents there. There will also be facilities such as library, sports center, and the Department of Health facility. And also public car park. That means parking will be available.
Any follow-up? We are glad to hear that you have these plans in place. If there are any changes necessary, we will still have time to adjust our plans. Thank you. For site formation works, we need to take. We are talking about a matter of a decade. So we'll see if there are any ways to enhance speed and efficiency. Thank you. Next, Mr. Andrew Lam. Thank you, Chair. Just then, members have raised questions on land acquisition and liaison with the residents. The Permanent Secretary has responded to that. I would like to know, after the pre-clearance survey, you have reached out to 50% of the residents. I wonder if you have identified any new residents moving in after the pre-clearance survey was done. Second, a question on construction works. You mentioned that in Q1 2024, the first batch of residents will move out, and in 2025, the second batch of residents will move out. From the paper, it is said that in 2031, the first batch of units will be completed. For phase 2, they will be completed in 2033. I understand that the paper is mainly on site formation works. My understanding is that 2021 and 23 are the time of population intake. So from the start of constructions to the completion date, we are talking about 7 years. I would like to know your work schedule. After the site is formed, do you hand over the land to the housing authority or the housing society so that works can start immediately? Thank you, Mr. Lam, for your questions. Perhaps I'll invite Ms. Leung from the Lands Department to answer the first question. I'll take the second question. May I refer to Annex 1, Enclosure 3. You can see that for the Cha Kwo Ling Village development, you can see the layout of the buildings. It will be easier to understand. The area shaded in yellow will be the blocks. There are 6 in total. The first batch of residents will move in the second quarter of 2031. We are talking about the southernmost block there, providing 1,000 units. This block is located on a piece of land that is mainly government land. There is only a very small portion of private land there. And construction works, or rather site formation works, will start next year. It will take about 2 years. Site formation work should be completed by 2026. Once it is completed, the piece of land will be handed over to the housing society. Construction period will take about 5 years. So 5 years from 2026 will be 2031. For the remaining 5 blocks, they will be done in the same phase. There may be site formation works completed ahead of schedule, and they may be handed over to the housing society ahead of schedule. Since more private land is involved in phase 2, residents will move out by mid-2025. So we believe that site formation works will be completed by 2028. Plus 3 years of construction time for the housing society to complete construction of the buildings. So we expect residents to move in by Q4 2033. Ms. Leung from Lands Department. Thank you. After the pre-clearance surveys, from our experience, yes, there are new residents moving in. I don't have the exact numbers on hand, but I'm sure that there are new residents moving in. Chair, I would like to follow up with my second round. Thank you. Next, Mr. Stanley Ng. We, the HKFTU, support the development of public housing estates. We commend the government's efforts on this front. These advanced works will cost us, especially on rehousing arrangements. Just then, you said that only 50% of the residents accept the rehousing compensation. Then what about the remaining half? Can you speed up the process of arranging compensation for residents and businesses affected? Many residents or businesses affected would like to be relocated in the same area. Second, on the Kaolin mine site. To my limited understanding, I believe that kaolin is used to make porcelain. I would like to know how it was processed in the past, since in Hong Kong we do not have enough minerals. Now the construction periods take more than 10 years. Is it possible for us to compress the works schedule further? So that the project can be more cost effective? Thank you. Permanent Secretary. Thank you for your views. On works schedule, we understand that we are on a very tight schedule. I've spent more time talking about the Cha Kwo Ling development. The Kowloon mine site is largely government land. So in terms of arranging work schedule, it will be easier for us to arrange. We expect to start site formation work by the middle of this year. And in 2025, we'll hand over the formed site to the Housing Authority. By 2025, we expect population intake to take place in 2030. We understand that there is public concern regarding the schedule, but we are pressing ahead at full steam already. For rehousing options in the same area, for affected residents by the Cha Kwo Ling Village development, there are 2 types of arrangements. If they are approved by the housing authorities, means tested mechanism, then they will be able to be relocated to public housing estates. And if they cannot pass the means test, then we'll provide transitional housing for them in the housing society developments. By 2026, the dedicated rehousing estate will be completed in Kai Tak. Residents can choose to stay in rental units of the HA or the HS, or to move to the dedicated rehousing estate in Kai Tak. For these DRE, there are rental units and there are units for sale. They can consider their options. For the DRE units for sale, we'll provide ex gratia allowance. So this can compensate their expenses on purchasing a DRE unit. Just then, a member asked about the use of the kaolin produced at the mine there. I'll invite Mr. Chen from the CEDD to answer this question. We understand that there is a historic background of the mine there. The mining contract expired in 1990. After that, there were no mining activities. So that means that there is no, according to documents from the 1980s, there is no profit to be made from the mine there already. Thank you. Next, Professor Lau Chi-peng. Thank you, Chair. I understand that today we are discussing site formation works, but I would like to follow up on what Mr. Bill Tang and what Mr. Sanny Ng said regarding heritage conservation. If we don't discuss it here today, then maybe this issue will be overlooked. The administration has told us that there is the law mention a Grade 3 historic building in the site and a Tin Hau Temple, also a Grade 3 historic building. Actually, in the Kaolin mine site, there are ancient graves there made out of the kaolin there. So there are at least two types of industry going on. One is a quarry there in Cha Kwo Ling. Is it possible for us to preserve the history of the 4 quarries for our future generation? If you have been to Guangzhou, there is a cathedral there made from the rocks from the 4 quarries in Hong Kong. For Hong Kong's development to integrate with the national development, we need to preserve our heritage as well. Our rocks have been transported to many regions in southern China. This part of history should be preserved as well. Hong Kong is more than cha-chan things or places that are Instagram worthy. Here the law mentioned is actually made from rocks from the 4 quarries. I see from the paper that you will reserve space around the mansion to preserve it. I wonder if you can incorporate the history of the four quarries in the law mention, as well as the history of the Kaolin mine. The Kaolin mine there were was actually used for brick making. I believe that this is a good opportunity to incorporate the history of the area in our heritage preservation. Is it correct to assume that the government owns the law mentioned right now, or is it privately owned? If it is privately owned, can the housing society liaise with the owners to see if it can be revitalized? Otherwise, in the whole housing development, there is no place to display the history of the 4 quarries and the history of brick making using the kaolin from the mine there. Please tell us the ownership situation of the law mansion. And is it possible for us to revitalize the mansion the way that I suggested?
Ownership of law mansion, please. PS. Thank you for the question. For law mansion is private property. Well, for the government's development projects, we acquire private lots in this project as well. So this will be handed over for revitalization and management by the housing society. Now we will preserve law mansion and put it to good use. Cha Kwo Ling Village, as well as showcasing the history of the Kaolin mine site. Well, I think the administration should follow up on these matters with Professor Lau. He just told us the history of the area, which is very interesting, including the quarries, the relevant industries. We must make sure that we will pass on the knowledge. In passing, let me also say that in Macau, they do a very good job in this regard. They have a museum. Mr. Yao Wing Kit, I support the funding proposal for public housing development and infrastructure works. But I also like to bring to your attention issues arising from site formation. One of the issues is rehousing for Cha Kwo Ling residents. According to your paper, if a resident passes the means test, he will be allocated a public housing unit. For those not opting for a means test, they can either opt for a housing society unit or one in a DRE, dedicated rehousing estate. Is there another option? Is it possible for them to apply for HOS flats as well? This is not set out in your paper. I just wonder if this option will be made available to the residents. Because after all, the housing society's DRE is also coming from public resources. So HOS is along the same line of thinking. Now, the project entails the construction of 4,500 units. That's a large number. It is set out here that it is for public housing development. So it means either public rental housing or subsidized housing. These two are very different things. You need to tell us exactly the mix and which you're going for, because you may be building a lot of one-person, two-person house flats for public housing, and if you later decide to go for subsidized sell flats instead, then these smaller flats are not popular at all. I understand for housing societies flats, however, they are very popular, much more popular than the HA's flats. So you need to disseminate information as quickly as possible so that you have a proper mix of flats in terms of the flat size. I thank member for the suggestions. To answer the second question, 4,500 units will be built in Cha Kwo Ling. In relation to the sales and rental arrangements, let me invite members to turn to footnote 1 on page 2 of the paper. We've explained the distribution of the 4,500 units. 3,000 units will be DRE units, comprising 1,000 DRE rental units and 2,000 DRE sale units. We have some 1,500 units left, and these will be subsidized sales flats. In other words, HOS flats. Now, to answer the members' first question, is it possible to allow eligible affected households to be rehoused in other HOS flats? Now, we've heard this suggestion before. Specifically, residents pointed to 2 HOS blocks in Kai Tak. For one of the blocks, it has been put up for sale, and for the other one, arrangements have been made. So there is no wiggle room. Policy-wise, if the affected household does not opt for a means test, then the options available are the housing society's flats and not HA flats. And as I explained, for HSDRE flats in Kai Tak in the future, some of the DRE flats will be for sale, some of them will be for rent. The other option is the ex gratia allowance, which can be provided to affected households. Mr. Chen Siu Hong, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I support the site formation and infrastructure works for public housing development in Cha Kwo Ling Village. I also support the relevant works for the development of ex-Cha Kwo Ling Kaolin mine site. Now, the PS explained Annex 2 to Enclosure 1 just now regarding the key development parameters. This is matched against the plan. I understand to the southern side of the site, 1,000 flats will be provided by this domestic block, and then for the remaining blocks, 3,500 units. So for phase 1, 1,000 units will be provided coming from this block alone, and for phase 2, 3,000 units will be provided through these 5 blocks. Is it because of the topography that the number of units to be provided per domestic block is different? Not all 1,000 units. Second question, is it because of the site layout that you have divided the site into 2 phases so that you go for the easier bit and make available 1,000 units for phase 1 and the remaining in phase 2? This paper explains the site formation, but I'd like to know your rationale in phasing the development. Is it possible for the blocks closer to the southern side of the site to be made available earlier, say for example to be incorporated in phase 1 development so as to speed up housing production? Because like Chairman said, it seems to be quite slow, because by 2031 only 1,000 units will be produced. Is it possible to build a couple of more blocks in phase 1? Other members have touched on the same subject as well. Now, PS, please specifically answer this question. Is it possible to complete a couple of more blocks in Phase 1 development? I will make a start, and then I will invite Mr. Chan from CDD to supplement, specifically whether it is possible to advance some of the blocks construction in Phase 2. First, to explain why we have two phases. For the first phase, is largely composed of government land. That means we don't need much time to resume land, and the number of affected households will be relatively smaller. We'll definitely go for Phase 1 developments in this manner. As for Phase 2, is it possible to advance the construction of some blocks? Now, as you see, the lots in Phase 2 are quite scattered, and Phase 2 also involves relatively a large number of affected households and business undertakings. Perhaps I'll give the floor to Mr. Chan to see whether it is possible to expedite the works in Phase 2. About the key development parameters in Annex 2 to Enclosure 1, the maximum domestic plot ratio as per the outline zoning plan is 7.5. As for building height restriction, is 110 or 130 meters above principal datum. So I'd say that we have exhausted the maximum domestic plot ratio permitted in the plan. All right, I will give the floor to Mr. Chan. Thank you for the questions. We are committed to handing over the site to the Housing Authority as quickly as possible. We have therefore broken down the site formation into two phases. In June 2023, we should commence Phase 1 site formation. However, for the other site, we will only be able to take possession in the second quarter of 2024. The contractor will start site formation as quickly as possible after taking over the site. As for Phase 2, by the end of 2024 or early 2025, we will commence Phase 2 site formation. Terms and conditions will be imposed in the contract. Phase 2 involves major excavation works over 10,000 tons. No blasting works can be carried out, and yet we do encourage contractors to complete site formation as quickly as possible using innovative means. Incentives will be given. If possible, we will pass out the site over to the Housing Authority as quickly as possible. As chair of the PWSC, let me make this comment. Very often, in relation to public housing development, whenever a member raises a question as to whether we can further optimize the use of land, you always answer that you have exhausted the maximum plot ratio. But Ms. Doris Ho, you work for the Development Bureau, so it's within your portfolio. Is it possible to further raise the plot ratio so as to produce, say, 10% more units? Because we're talking about enhancing speed and efficiency, quality, quantity. Mr. Bill Tang, another round. Thank you. The Permanent Secretary already addressed my concern, but I do have this specific question to ask. We are not only asking for the preservation of a building, but the conservation of cultural characteristics in the area. Let me give you this example. The Cha Kwo Ling Village will celebrate birth of Tin Hau this Friday. This will be a major local activity. Is there room for them to hold this festival again after completion of the Cha Kwo Ling public housing development? Is there a space for them to do so, in other words? If there is, which party will be responsible for its management? Because by then the housing society might as well say they didn't receive order to make space for the activities to be held. Next question. There is space for generations of Cha Kwo Ling villages to meet as matters stand at the moment. In the future, will there be a similar space available for residents to gather there? Another question. I understand the whole development will take place over a span of 10 years. It's not a seamless transition. That means at some point residents will have to first move out to be rehoused later. Are there supporting measures to show care for these residents?
Permanent Secretary, on your first question, as I said, even though the Tin Hau Temple is not within the boundary of the development, but if you refer to paragraph 24, will provide a 900 square meters open space next to the Tin Hau Temple. This will provide a space for residents to continue their celebration of their traditional festivals. This 900 square meter open space is something that we will definitely go ahead with. And on the prospect of establishing an office to handle these matters, we have heard your view. We are still looking into various options. Just then, members have said that there will be a joint user complex there and asked if it is possible to provide an office in the complex. We will definitely consider that. Third, on seamless transition. I have to admit that we cannot achieve seamless transition in this project because the dedicated rehousing estate will be completed in 2026. And for this development, residents have to move out by 2024 or 25. But we have arrangements for them. If they are eligible, we'll arrange for them to move into HA or HS flats. Then, by 2026, when the dedicated rehousing estates are completed, they'll be given the option to move into the DRE or to stay in their rental flats of the Housing Authority. This arrangement will be in place. Thank you. I believe that these traditional activities depend on the organization of local residents. If they are scattered, I wonder if these traditional activities can carry on. I understand that with urban development, people may be moving around and there may be changes in the demographic, but other than providing hardware, we need to provide appropriate software as well. Next, For the first round, Mr. Louis Long. Thank you, Chair. Just the members ask questions about cultural heritage, but my question is rather technical. In Annex 1, Enclosure 6, for the a summary of trees of particular interest affected. In it, you have an amenity value mentioned, and it is explained in Note 3 that the amenity value is rated into 3 categories, that is high, medium, and low. As for form, health condition, structural condition, etc. My question is that, is the amenity value a result of combining form, health condition, and structural condition? I'm sure that you have an objective standard in assessing its health condition or structural condition. But how about the form of the trees? Is it a subjective standard? Permanent Secretary. Perhaps I'll invite Mr. Chen from the CEDD to give a detailed explanation. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Long. We engage professionals to assess trees affected in the construction area. There is an explanation of the term amenity value. It is assessed by its functional values for shade, seasonal interest, screening, etc. This is how we assess trees' amenity value. As for the forms of the trees, for example, if the trees grow on a slope, if it has to maintain balance based on the angle of the slope, then we need to consider whether the tree can be transplanted. However, if we transplant the tree to a flat surface, then the survival rate for the tree is very low. If this is the case, then we will recommend removal. Of course, we need to consider whether or not it is an important tree. Any follow-up? I understand what you said. If trees are growing on a slope, it is difficult to transplant it on a flat surface. But my question was on how you assess forms of the trees. Do you have an objective standard to decide whether the tree has poor, average, or good form? Or is it a subjective assessment by the officers involved? As for the form of the tree, there is professional assessment involved with objective and subjective assessment. If you look at the tree form, if the tree crown is broad and there are lots of branches, then it is considered to have a good form. Thank you. Next, Dr. Chow Man Kong. If we are able to establish a good mechanism for the Cha Kwo Ling Village development, it will be a good example for future development at the Aoqi development. But after the panel on development meeting, there were 40% of residents that you have got in touch with, and now a month has passed and you have reached 50% of them. That is very good work. I wonder if you have statistics on the particulars of the residents, such as their age distribution, etc. Where will you rehouse these residents affected? That is the first question. Second, Ms. Ho has mentioned that residents will be scattered after they move out of the area. So I wonder if you'll be able to rehouse them within the same building. This is quite important, since the DRE at Kai Tak will be completed by 2026. Is there anything that you can do to compress the time or to move them into a single block? Surely that is not that difficult. That's my second question. Third, I'm very interested to learn more about the waste disposal cost. The cost is at $102 million and some $40 million. Is it just on transportation? If that's the case, it must be a world record. So I wonder what that cost entails. Mr. Chen will take the third question. To answer your first question, half of the 800 residents have undergone assessment by the Lands Department. That depends on the submission of adequate information. We need to see whether they have indeed lived there for as long as they claim. After initial assessment by the Lands Department, the information will be passed to the Housing Authority or the Housing Society. There are dozens of cases for further vetting. These cases are still being processed, and it will take time. For residents affected in Phase 1, there are those who need to move out by next year. We hope that we'll be able to allocate them with a flat by the middle of this year or early next year. If possible, we want to allocate, the Housing Authority will allocate them with flats in the urban area. We'll try our best to relocate them within the same area, but I cannot give any guarantees. As for whether or not we can relocate them to the same block or the same location, we want to do that, but that would be quite challenging since the DRE will be completed in 2026. We want to be able to achieve seamless transition. I'll invite Mr. Chen to tell us more about the construction waste expenditure. Excavation and transportation costs are included in the paper. For the disposal of construction waste cost, it is the cost required for the public for the PFRF to receive construction waste. Thank you. Next, Mr. Andrew Lam. 3 minutes. Just then I heard that there are new residents moving in after the pre-clearance survey was conducted. I would like to know how you handle these residents. Second question on works procedure. I forgot the number. Well, for the 2 phases in Project 849. It will take 5 years, including piling works, to form the land. But for Project 711, the piece of land will be handed over to the Housing Authority by Q4 2026. That means 5 years. It is not unreasonable to spend 5 years on piling works and construction of the buildings. However, I believe there is still room to further compress the work schedule. And second, I would like to know how come Project 711 seems to have a more efficient work schedule. Thank you.
Ms. Ho. To answer members' first question, if a resident moves in after the pre-clearance survey, then most likely the resident will not be eligible for PRH allocation. We do have this requirement. If you undergo the means test and then is found to be eligible for PRH, you have to at least have lived there for 2 years. So for those moving in after the pre-clearance survey, they will at most receive a domestic removal allowance. Most likely they will not be eligible for public housing allocation. So there is a big difference in terms of the CNR package for residents moving in after the pre-clearance survey. This is an anti-abuse measure. To take the second question about work schedule, the Housing Authority and Housing Society do their level best to compress work schedule. 5 years for piling works and superstructure works to be completed. I do think that there is room to further compress the construction timetable. We can go back and discuss with them. I think that this is a time frame that they feel that they are most confident to complete the works. Second round, Mr. Chan Sil-hong. I think Chairman also touched on this point. Permanent Secretary just now answered my question and said that the maximum plot ratio somewhat puts the administration, puts a straitjacket on the administration. In terms of public housing development, it is necessary to review the development parameters. Maybe this can be done at the development panel. We're talking about removing obstacles to expedite housing production in general. So I think that we can discuss this item at the development panel meeting in the future. Another question is on paragraph 14. The administration has proposed discussing 2 items at once because 849 and 771 are close to each other. So it is suggested that we discuss both at the same time. Now my question is this. Because of the proximity of these 2 projects, does the CDD intend to invite tender for both projects at the same time, or will you do it separately? There are merits for either approach. For the purpose of improving interfacing and streamlining procedures, there may be merits in combining the 2 projects. A question for the CDD. Mr. Chen? Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the questions. I think Mr. Chen exactly points out our strategy and our intention. In terms of project planning, we separate the 2. But in terms of actual works, we have works contracts in 2 phases. For phase 1, it entails the site formation at the Cha Kwo Ling coal mine site. It also involves the associated works at Cha Kwo Ling Village. This can help us reduce abortive works in the next phase. It can also help us save time and cost in order to maximize efficiency. If I'm not mistaken, you're talking about the two different works projects, Kowloon Mine and also Phase 1 of Cha Kwo Ling Village. This will be bundled into one contract or one tender first phase, and then the northern side of Cha Kwo Ling Village, another contract. That's right. For the purpose of interfacing and coordination, why not bundle everything under one contract? Mr. Chan. Now, for the second part of the project, we need to complete land resumption before we proceed. That is why for parts not requiring land resumption, they are put under Phase 1. And then when we have a more accurate timetable, we can then start tendering early so as to take it forward seamlessly. No other questions? Then I will put this item to a vote. Members who are in favor of the recommendation in PWSC 2024-24 paper number 6, please raise your hands. All in favor. I think members who have taken part in the vote support this proposal. So this proposal is endorsed. Next question, do we recommend a further discussion by the Finance Committee on PWSC 2023-24 paper number 6? Members are familiar with the procedures in accordance with paragraph 3 of the FC procedures. I need to ask members whether we recommend a further discussion of this item at the Finance Committee. Specifically, the Public Works Subcommittee recommends a further discussion of the proposal set out in paper number 6 PWSC 2023-24 by the FC. All right, I see hands in the air. Members are not in favor of this statement. In other words, the PWSC does not recommend a further discussion of this paper, PWSC 2023-24, number 6. I thank the administration for helping us with the discussion. Item 2 on the agenda, 197TB pedestrian walkway system between Heng Shing Road and Tai Wo Hao Road, PWSC 2024-23, number 7. Members are invited to recommend to the FC the upgrading of 197TB to Category A at an estimated cost of 192.5 million in money of the day prices. On the 17th of March this year, the administration consulted the panel on transport. Members in general supported the submission of this item to the Public Works Subcommittee for further discussion. On the 8th of May, via email, the report on the deliberations of the panel was sent to members. We have to answer our questions today from the administration, Ms. Amy Wong, Deputy Secretary for Transport and Logistics, Ms. Gillian Lam, Principal Assistant Secretary for Transport and Logistics, Mr. Jimmy Chan, Director of Highways, Mr. Thomas Wong, Assistant Director of Highways, and Ms. Carrie Leung, Chief Traffic Engineer of Transport Department. A number of members are waiting to speak. We start with Ms. Jovi Chan. 4 minutes, questions and answers included. Thank you, Chair. First and foremost, the FTU supports this project. We have been striving for more barrier-free facilities at the district level. I support the barrier-free facilities to be provided in Heng Shing Road and Tai Wo Hao Road. In March this year, before the paper was available, the government departments liaised with Ms. Lau Mei Lo and Ms. Chen Onei and Li Wai Lok the community members of the FTU and arrange for a site inspection. We also add our views in order to continue to improve the barrier-free facilities in Kwai Ching area. Now, I have 4 questions. First, we suggest extending the covered walkway so that when pedestrians come down from the escalator to the ground level, there will be a rain shelter for them. So the covered area should be expanded, but it is not clearly shown in Annex 2. Second suggestion, you should make sure there is a sufficient inventory of spare parts for repair and maintenance in the future. In Kwai Ching, the uphill escalators are heavily used, say for Kwai Hing Road. Very often the escalator breaks down and frequent repairs are needed. There should be a sufficient inventory of spare parts for repair in the future. Third suggestion, you should make sure that the noise is properly controlled because of the school and the residential neighborhood nearby. Fourth suggestion is on lighting. This is not clearly set out in the paper. So 4 questions, please. Who will take the question? Ms. Amy Wong. Perhaps I'll defer to the director to take Ms. Chan's question. Mr. Jimmy Chan. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the questions. Please speak into the mic. About pedestrians taking the escalator to the at-grade level. We have an area that is covered for pedestrians to wait there and, say, open the umbrellas in rainy days. So the space is available. As for repair and maintenance, the EMSD is in charge of regular maintenance according to the law. During maintenance, we understand that users may be inconvenienced, so we will publish the notice in advance for information. In fact, we have 2 escalators. It's a 2-way escalator system, so we'll make sure that one escalator will be made available for use by residents when the other is being repaired. I think from this plan, the question is, after exiting the escalator, the covered area is not large enough. The question is whether you can enlarge the area. We've considered the suggestion. The fact is that it is a slope, and after exiting the escalator, one will reach the pavement. And anyway, we will consider enlarging the area so that there is sufficient space for pedestrians to have some time there. Mr. Tang Fei, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chair. 2 questions. Paragraph 17. This project is not a designated project under Schedule 2 of the Environmental Impact Assessment Ordinance. That means it will not have a major environmental impact in the long term. Suitable mitigation measures will be implemented. For example, noise barriers, silence construction plans because of a school nearby. According to the law, as I understand, it is not mandatory to erect noise barriers or use silenced construction equipment. Only that you're using them to minimize the noise impact on the neighborhood and on the school. My question is whether the funding application involves the provision of noise barriers and silence construction plants. Another question on paragraph 20. Land acquisition. 22. About 300 square meters of land will be resumed and rights of temporary occupation will be created. Is it that after completion of your project, you will not continue to occupy the land?
Director, please. Thank you for your question. In our contract, we require contractors to use machines with the minimum noise produced. Since there is a secondary school nearby, noises may produce during piling works. We don't want to affect the operation of the school. We want to avoid carrying out noisy works as far as possible during exam periods. This is to minimize the impact it will cause on the school. The project is not a designated project under Schedule 2 of the Environmental Impact Assessment Ordinance. That means that according to the law, we do not have to conduct an environmental impact assessment before the project commences. However, we still want to minimize the impact. During construction, contractors are still required by law to follow the requirements such as obtaining a noise permits, etc. Second, on land acquisition, there are two parts involved. The first part is a piece of land that will be permanently occupied. The location where we are about to build escalator is located on a piece of private land. So we need to acquire this piece of land permanently. As for the other 800 square meter of private land, this piece of land is used during construction. After construction, the land will be returned to the landowner. Thank you. For all public works projects, the administration considers any environmental impact that may arise during construction. Just a member was concerned about the nearby school. I'm sure that during construction, mitigation measures will be in place to minimize the schools or residents nearby. Projects that are designated project under Schedule 2 of the EIAO, environmental impact assessments will have to be conducted. Currently, the government is reviewing the relevant ordinance because it may lengthen the construction time. I'm sure that the amendments will be submitted to us soon. Thank you. Next, Mr. Chen Xiu-hong. Thank you, Chair. Currently, residents from Hing Sing Road and Tai Wo Hau Road to Kwai Hing Station, they need to travel through a staircase that is about 80 meters high. That is very inconvenient. That is about 6-story tall. In the past, I've inquired whether there could be elevator tower built. And at the time, the government response was that since the elevator will be close to the Syntax Secondary School and Kowloon East estate, because of privacy issue concern, you have decided to adopt the design of a pedestrian walkway system with visual barriers to block the views of the nearby structure. You've standardized the arrangement and structure of the cover of the pedestrian walkway and to facilitate contractors to adopt off-site assembly method for construction. Since visual barriers will be in place to block the views of the nearby structures, and cost effectiveness will be enhanced through the new design. From the concept drawings, I could not see any enhanced design or alignment. You said that you were concerned about privacy and visual impact. Well, for the current design, there is still privacy issues. So how are you going to alleviate public concern? Second question. Since a stair lift will be installed, are you concerned about its operation? Since there are different levels involved here, wheelchair users will have to stop on a platform before moving on to another stair lift. So who will be holding the keys of the relevant stair lifts? Third, on noise. Very often during public works, the government is concerned about noise issue. I can see that there is noise barrier, use of silence construction plans, and avoidance of carrying out noisy works during school exam periods. However, students cannot focus with noise, not just during exams, but also in lessons as well. So how can you ensure that with the use of silenced construction plants, the impact on schools and residents nearby will be minimized? Director, thank you for your question. First, on visual impact, we have conducted a detailed consultation. We have liaised with the schools nearby many times. Our early design was to build an elevator that includes an elevator tower. If we have to construct a lift tower, it will be 6 stories high. And this may cause a more serious visual impact to the neighboring area. That is why, after consultation with the affected parties, we've decided to adopt the design of a pedestrian walkway system. We are going to install semi-transparent or opaque fencing or barriers so that people on the pedestrian walkway will not be able to see or look into the flats of Kwai Hong Court. In terms of alignment, we try to shorten the distance so that users can get to their destination as soon as possible. So the current design is already adopting the enhanced alignment. As for the stair lift, it is not difficult to use. You only need a key. If users are able to produce a proof of identity showing that they are a disabled person, then they'll be able to use the stair lift. And there is a hotline there. They can call the relevant office, who can then remotely start the stair lift. There is a universal key for all stair lifts across the territory. So there is no need for them to secure a key for every stair lift that they use. Lastly, on noise concern, we understand that there is a school nearby, so we'll keep an eye on the noise impact on the school. Just as we mentioned, using noise barriers, etc. And we will monitor its possible impact on the school nearby. We'll maintain constant liaison with the school. Thank you. Next, Mr. Frankie Yik, 4 minutes. Thank you. I support these barrier-free facilities. But I would like to follow up on what Mr. Chan Siu-hong said regarding the use of stair lift. I wondered if a person has to stand by 24 hours to operate the stair lift. So thank you for answering the question and solving my concern. I wonder if it can be done automatically. I'm not sure if this is under your purview. I just would like to know the answer to that. Well, it is good that there is a universal key for all the stair lifts across Hong Kong, but is there any problem in terms of operation? Director? Thank you. The stair lifts are maintained by the relevant departments, but there is 24-hour assistance available. On site, there are instructions for wheelchair users. As I said, they are able to contact the control center, which can offer assistance. For stair lifts that are provided by the MTRC, users can contact their staff members if they encounter any problems in operation. So in the past, the experience was smooth in using stair lifts. Thank you. Next, Mr. Holden Chow. Thank you. I support the construction of this pedestrian walkway system, but I have some questions. If we look at the figure, there is a stair lift involved, but it is not a wheelchair elevator that is commonly used. Have you assessed the feasibility of adopting the other option, or if there are other reasons? Just then you said that there are 24-hour assistants and that they may have the key to use their lifts. But I think we need to remember that other than wheelchair users, there are families carrying baby strollers who may need to use the stair lifts as well. I wonder if you have done any assessment in this regard. Thank you. Well, I think that it was mentioned earlier why there were no lifts involved in the design, because it has to involve the construction of a lift tower. Director, thank you. You were right in saying that our prevalent design is to involve a lift so that wheelchair users and baby strollers can use the lifts. Stair lifts may not be that suitable for strollers, but we need to strike a balance. After consulting the residents nearby, we found that a lift tower close to the entrance of their housing estate may cause visual impact and other nuisances. So after considering various factors, we settled on the current design. And to ensure that wheelchair users will be able to use the facility, we added the stair lift for residents nearby and most users. The system is still very convenient, and I believe that this is a feasible design. Thank you.
Mr. Ben Chan. Thank you, Chairman. I speak in support of this project. At the community level, I have been liaising with the owners' corporation of the relevant buildings. Now, there are 2 schools in the vicinity that are noise sensitive. So what exactly will you put in place to control the noise, especially when Kwai Hong Court is extremely close to the escalators? So residents will definitely be affected by its operation. The noise barriers may be very thin. During construction, you may use just a sheet, and the mitigation is rather limited. Excavation will be involved. We want to know the extent of excavation. Does it involve just the site or the slopes nearby as well? Director, about mitigation of noise from construction, we have a number of options. As far as works are concerned, we will go for options that will generate as little noise as possible. For example, we use smaller piles so as to minimize the noise generated from piling works. We also require contractors to use, as far as possible, silent construction equipment. And during construction, we also erect noise barriers so as to control the noise as much as possible. We'll also consider, in terms of construction or works arrangements, say during school examination periods, we'll avoid carrying out works that may generate a lot of noise, so as to minimize impact on schools nearby. At present, there is a set of staircase on the slope. While construction is in progress, the current staircase will have to be temporarily closed off. The works area is not large. It is inevitable that the current staircase will have to be removed so as to make way for the escalators to be built. A new set of staircase will be built for use in the future. During the construction stage, temporary traffic diversion will also be put in place. There are a number of alternative pathways to reach different destinations instead of using the current staircase. Albeit a longer journey time, we will strive to compress the construction timetable as much as possible to minimize impact on users. Mr. Chan, you have another question? There is a cover. During piling works, you need to remove the cover. Is that right? So, will you consider building the cover after piling works have been completed before you start excavation, so that you have the cover to shield off noise and minimize impact on residents? I think this is rather difficult to achieve technical-wise, because this will be built on the as part of the structure of the escalator. So we'll need to complete the piling works first. And it is also quite impossible to build a cover on top of the area where piling works are to be carried out. However, we are confident that the noise mitigation measures will help lower the noise to an acceptable level. I'm talking about completing the piling works, building the cover, and then commencing excavation works. Is it possible? I think the director already explained that as far as the works procedures are concerned, that this is not feasible. I share the same view as well. But of course, I understand where Mr. Chan comes from. He reminds the administration to impose noise mitigation measures. In fact, the industry promotes the use of silenced or low noise construction equipment and machinery. And anyway, I'd like to pick up on Mr. Chan's point. Is it that a temporary staircase will be built as a transitional measure? I don't think we will be able to build a temporary staircase. No, not on that site, but will there be a temporary staircase nearby? Because you talk about removing the existing staircase while works are being carried out. That means the pedestrians will need to use the main road, right? That means if the staircase is not to be used, one will have to walk along the slope to Tai Wo Hau Road. There is in fact another staircase which is quite steep leading to Tai Wo Hau Road. It's a bit farther away. And the other alternative is to walk along the slope. Mr. Louis Long. Having heard the director's reply, I have two questions instead of just one. The current staircase will be removed during the construction stage, and this will cause great inconvenience to residents. Is it possible, if circumstances permit, to build a temporary staircase for them? Another question is on land acquisition. Page 7 of your paper, I read that this project requires resumption of about 300 square meters of private land and creation of rights of temporary occupation of about 794.3 square meters of private land. And yet you estimate the cost of land resumption to be $0.93 million. Now I'm looking at Annex 4. The $0.93 million includes contingency and interest, whereas the actual estimated cost for land resumption or land compensation is just $0.773 million. Now, setting aside the rights of temporary occupation, for land resumption, the estimated cost is $2,577 per square meter. May I know the use of the land to be resumed? According to LAOPM 2022, circular number 3. For Kowloon North NDA, the before value of agricultural land is $3,100 per square meter. So if you acquire private land in the area and only offer $2,577 per square meter, will it be too low an offer? Yes. Let me first take the question on traffic arrangements during construction stage. This is a very narrow site. It is inevitable that the current staircase will have to be demolished before we commence works. That means residents will need to make a detour and use other alternative routes. That means an extra journey time of 5 to 6 minutes if one goes via Kwai Shing Circuit to Taiwan Road. Indeed, it is inconvenient, but then the site is just too narrow. If we build a temporary staircase on the periphery of the site, it will entail some risks. We will have large machinery in operation by then, so this may not be the best arrangements for users. Indeed, users will be inconvenienced in the coming 3 years during construction. To answer members' other question on land acquisition, we act in accordance with Cap 370 in resuming land. A nearby school and residential buildings will be involved as slopes, as the area of the slope is resumed. This is in accordance with the computation of the Lands Department. The compensation rate for land resumption may have to be updated. I'm referring to PM 2022/3. And if for agricultural land, the compensation rate is $3,100, your offer for resuming this area in the urban district seems to be too low. I think this is a consensus reached with the Lands Department. I have nothing to add. Ms. Doris Ho, I do not have specific information at hand, but perhaps I can supplement that in writing later. I think the calculation of the compensation rate is based on the prevailing policy. Is the offer on the low side? Perhaps we need to go back and check the exact figures. All right, supplementary reply in writing, please. Perhaps we can follow up on this matter after the meeting. Next, Mr. Tony Chair, Deputy Chair. Thank you, Chairman. I speak in support of this project. I raised a concern at the panel meeting about the elderly, the disabled, and the wheelchair-bound using the escalator system. The administration already arranged, explained the arrangements. I do hope that the administration can better harness technology so that we don't need a key for the stair lift to be used. Say, can we use a mobile phone to activate the lift instead? Well, Chairman, as the government promotes a smart city, this is something we should ponder. Second question. In another project previously submitted to the Public Works Subcommittee, members had concerns about cost estimates. We're talking about the difference of 6 stories. Some $200 million will be spent. Have you looked into the latest cost estimates? I understand that tendering will be carried out in parallel. I would just urge the relevant departments to be mindful of the following facts. The cost estimates submitted to the Public Works Subcommittee should be up to date so as to achieve accuracy as far as possible. So just a reminder, Chairman. Who will take the question, please, DS? I thank the member for his comment on the stair lift. The Lands Department, the Highways Department has been discussing with the EMSD on the latest technology to improve its usage. We'll keep this in view. On cost estimate, in February, the Highways Department commenced tendering. The paper with cost estimates already reflects the returned tender price. This is the most up-to-date project estimate. All right, if there are no other questions from members, I will put this to a vote. Will member in favor of PWSC 2023-24, number 7, please raise your hands. All in favor? All hands in the air. I don't need to ask the next question. No objection. I think members who have voted are most in favor of the proposal, so this proposal is endorsed. Next question is whether we recommend the FC to have a separate voting of this paper in accordance with paragraph 41 of the FC procedures. The specific question is the PWSC recommends the FC to further discuss PWSC 2023-24, paper number 7, and the recommendation therein. Further discussion in favor, please raise your hand. Nobody. I think that members all want to expedite the works as far as possible. It will be a great inconvenience for users to make a detour in the coming 3 years. Once again, those in favor, nobody. Those against, please raise your hand. I see a majority here. I think members who have taken part in the vote are not in favor of this question. This question is negative. The PWSC does not recommend a further discussion by the FC on PWSC 2023-24, paper number 7. We have endorsed 2 funding proposals. These items are expected to be considered by the FC in May or thereafter in 2023. The next meeting of the PWSC is scheduled 8:30 to 10:30 in the morning of the 24th of May, 2023. Please pencil in, and I thank the administration for attending. Thank you.